and unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Well, good morning, everybody. So, this morning, I get a chance, given what I wanted to talk about, to put in a plug for a wonderful service that's being provided by one of our Sangha members, John, sending out these quotes by text message, 3 times a week, I think. Yeah. And occasionally, when I see what he's posted, I'll go, I think I'd like to build a talk around that one. So I'll set it aside. And that was the case earlier this week. I decided that one that he posted a few days ago would kind of be a nice subject to talk about as we're observing Rohatsu, the honoring the enlightenment of the Buddha and all that has followed upon that consequential event. And of course, one of the things that followed was the establishment of what we term Buddhism. But that talk about terms that it's pretty tough to really talk about what they're really referring to. Boy, Buddhism certainly fits that bill. That's a big tent. Do you have to be an actual Buddhist going to a center, a temple, in order to be a Buddhist? Probably not. At least not by the common definition of that. But on the other hand, you don't really have to take vows to do anything to be considered a Buddhist. So you come right down to it, and it becomes something that you start scratching your head going, well, what does it signify? And I'm not here to answer that question. Sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not. But it's appropriate. It's a good lead-in to John's quote, which comes from the Zen teachings of Homeless Kodo, who is a really interesting character. Not homeless in the sense that he was living at a place like our men's shelter down at 2100 Lakeside, but homeless in the sense of not having a Zen center. Homeless in the sense that he just kind of went around to whoever would put him up for a while. And yet, despite that lack of roots, he became pretty well known. And this text, in fact, the Zen teachings of Homeless Kodo, was drawn from quotes of his that were published in a newspaper over in Japan. With commentary, you'd have the comments by Kodo, and then there would be additional comments by one of Kodo's principal students, Uchiyama Roshi, who's maybe best known in the Western world as the author of Opening the Hand of Thought, which is an important text. And then Uchiyama Roshi's student, Shahaku Okimura, who's known in this country, I'll just say, as one of our great Dogen commentators. So we've got 3 generations, the original Kodo, and then Uchiyama and Shahaku, who are all contributing to these pieces. So that's the context for what John selected for this posting of his. So let me read it. It's just a real short paragraph. And it actually is the posting by Uchiyama Roshi that was attached to this piece. Uchiyama says here, religion loses its vitality when people simply follow fixed doctrines and maintain religious institutions. Only when we seek the truth of ourselves and create our own spiritual life can we give birth to the potential that can point the way for our time. So, what he's really referencing here, to my mind, and the term religion, even a bigger, tougher term to get a handle on than Buddhism, one of the myriad religions. So he could have said Buddhism, but he expanded it because it's something we have in common with all the other traditions. That religion such as Buddhism, I'll insert, loses its vitality. To be vital is to be alive, to be thriving. And to be alive and thriving means you're interacting with your current surroundings, drawing nourishment from them, and able then to interact with the world. That's to be vital. So it involves, by its very nature, interacting. If you're not doing that, you're not vital. So it loses its vitality when people simply follow fixed doctrines and maintain religious institutions. That word simply is real important in what he's trying to convey, I think. So it's okay to follow fixed doctrines and maintain religious institutions. But if you're doing simply that, it's connoting that's kind of the sum total of your religious practice. You have your particular catechism, to borrow the Catholic term for it, but it's your set of doctrines and beliefs. And then you are also maintaining religious institutions, maintaining them financially through your more active support in terms of practicing at these places. And, we all have a pretty clear sense of this. It's probably more tied in with Christianity in our society, but only because Christianity is so well rooted here. The Japanese would look at this and say, well, that's Buddhism. Buddhism has these fixed doctrines and they maintain religious institutions. We haven't reached that point yet. We don't think. But it's a tendency that's always there. So no group, including we very special Buddhists, are immune to this because there are doctrines that arise. And there are institutions that arise. We're connected to institutions, including Jikoji Zen Center, and Cleveland Zazen Group is associated with a very major institution, Rochester Zen Center. And we derive a great deal of spiritual support in terms of guiding our the way we understand the teachings They provide so many resources, make them available. In our case, at least in pre-pandemic times, we would once a year, a pretty significant group of Crooked River folks would fly out there and attend a week-long session. So it gave people an opportunity to learn, be trained in temple forms, to do things like oryoki meals, uh, and other great advantages that come with religious institutions. So it's not to say they're bad. You should, but because that also becomes a possible way of viewing them. We were talking yesterday about limited view. That's a very limited view, and to say they're great is a limited view. We have to see them in their full spectrum, with all that they bring and with the dangers that they present. And that's an interesting dynamic to follow in real time as things unfold with any institution, be it Jikoji and Rochester Zen Center, or a mega institution like the Catholic Church. That's almost like religion and Buddhism. It's like it's so massive. They do have a structure you could diagram and point to, but the reality there is pretty complex. And there's vitality within that. No question. Even within Catholicism, as large as it is, as old as it is, and with the issues they've been confronted with over the years, there's still so much value there. They do wonderful stuff in so many different ways, promoting this kind of spiritual, this creation of our own spiritual life, and give birth to the potential that can point the way for our time. So we can look at institutions and they're playing that role. So when and we've all done this, that's why we're here. We're here because we've linked up with an institution, even though it may not look like much of an institution. That's kind of one of the interesting things about the Koban-Chino lineage. It's intentionally kind of not institutional. In fact, my teacher, Mike Newhall, indicated that if Koban saw somebody who was trying to build an institution, he would try to undercut it. He didn't think that was helpful. So, but this vitality, and I want to connect this now back to Susan's talk launching us yesterday morning, where recounting the story of the Buddha's enlightenment and all the vitality that the Buddha brought to his search. And while it might not have been institutions that he was using, yet there were fellow travelers on the path that he practiced with. And they came by their practices through various influences within the Vedic traditions in India. So, which had that element of renunciation and just kind of devoting all of your effort towards spiritual attainment. So there was, we could almost call it, I think, a structure, even though it was kind of loosely held, that he was participating in. And it had an influence on him, clearly. Otherwise, he never would have ended up sitting under the Bodhi tree. So all of those individuals were involved in the vitality with which Shakyamuni engaged in this path. And we look at Shakyamuni and his enlightenment and the doctrines, his teaching of like the Four Noble Truths, often considered to be the first teaching he gave post-enlightenment. That has become kind of a fixed doctrine. Fixed in the sense that we can state it in words in a fixed way, but not so fixed in terms of how do you live it. Maybe that's kind of the real gist of working with these spiritual religious doctrines is, yeah, they're going to be in words, and words get handed down, sometimes even in stone tablets. But yet, the words have to become vital. They're not frozen. So the meaning of like interdependence, which our group is studying in connection with Ben Connolly's book on the Huayan tradition, interdependence in our time means something different. It still means what it did back then, don't get me wrong there, but it means something way more expansive. There was no internet back then. The internet gives a whole new meaning to interdependence. There was no notion of synergy. As I presented it here, A plus B plus C plus D equals 1, which is one aspect of the higher math, which I call it. But then to fully draw that out, after the 1, it's greater than A plus B plus C plus D, because that's the effect of synergy. When things come together and interact, what comes out the other end is greater. Our own human bodies are maybe the best testament to that. If we broke them down to the chemical elements, we'd never think how you're going to add that together and come up with me, with you. What the heck is that? So, talk about synergy on steroids. We're living examples. The whole is always greater than the sum of the parts. But of course, there's positive synergy. There's also negative synergy. So, and that's something that we don't seem to have such a great handle on. But again, just in terms of the vitality of a teaching, a doctrine, the doctrine of interdependence, that's a doctrine of Buddhism, could certainly be considered one. But its meaning now is much, much different. Much different. The spread of pandemic diseases because of the way people travel. Disease back then, it would take decades. The plague would break out and it would be pretty slow moving. Today, it would be boom, global. Interdependence. That's just one example. And we could take all these Buddhist terms and look at them in such a way, even down to some of the most basic ones. Dukkha. What is dukkha in our time? Very different. But yet, in some respects, it hasn't changed much at all at its roots. And that's where the power of these spiritual traditions lies. So it's twofold, I think, in terms of the core teaching remaining very relevant. But the reason why it remains very relevant is because it does apply to this whole brand new set of circumstances. And that's kind of amazing. But that's kind of the nature of the spiritual. Whereas so many scientific theories, once they become obsolete, they tend not to function so well. So they just get scrapped. But spiritual traditions, at their core, they tend to have aspects, and we certainly, I think it's safe to say we all see that within Buddhism, aspects that are deeply relevant. The teaching of dukkha and its causes, the teachings of interdependence. So the way they play out in our world is quite different. But yet at their core, they're not so different. So I think to the degree that we maintain that vitality, we therein maintain the ability to be compassionate, practice loving kindness in ways that are meritorious, that have positive benefit, rather than just blindly following some old doctrine. So Shakyamuni's great enlightenment, and I mentioned this in my talk yesterday afternoon, his reluctance to teach after attaining his awakening. In order for us to be talking about it now, it had to be taught, and the tradition had to be passed on generation to generation. So what is it that does get passed on? That's also a rich Zen koan. What is it that's transmitted? It certainly isn't the doctrine or the institution, even though they're part of that package. But that's not what's transmitted. They're just kind of the packaging. You have to open them up and see what's really inside there. And read the owner's manual and start doing it, using it, practicing it. Since right effort is required, get those batteries, put them in there so I could do the work. And that's how we carry forward the Buddha's enlightenment. So it's really the reason why we observe a date like Rohatsu is because we recognize we need to be about the business of Shakyamuni. We feel that that's our calling as well. I need to do that. And I take that on. I mean, when I become ordained, I am essentially saying, I am going to do that work. what Shakyamuni did. In my own fashion, in my own time, that's what I'm doing. And so many others in all the traditions are doing the exact same thing. That's the vitality of the Buddha's path and all the other paths that we also are walking in tandem with out there in the world. But yet, we're also familiar, and certainly within Buddhism as well, that it can become just kind of an empty shell because there's this sense of identity that's important to people to be able to identify. And there's comfort that some take from that. Just, what is your religious affiliation? And to be able to say Buddhist or Christian or Jewish kind of makes you feel like you belong. Okay, now I know who I am. But this is where we come back to this seeking the truth of ourselves. Only when we seek the truth of ourselves and create our own spiritual life can we give birth to the potential that can point the way for our time. So, seeking the truth of ourselves is something everybody has to do on their own. This is what sets our practice apart from doctrines and institutions. If you're a practicing Buddhist, then this is kind of what that path looks like. Studying the self, as Dogen called it. Taking the backward step, shining the light within. And create your own spiritual life in the way you live your life. That sense of agency, that sense of karma, so that how we conduct ourselves does have effects. And we're aware of that, and we're mindful of it, and it informs our practice. So these two things come together, the doctrines and the institutions, and then seeking the truth and creating a spiritual life. So the fixed doctrines, in order to incorporate it into seeking the truth and creating a spiritual life, they only work if we kind of round them out. They can't be too overly fixed, which is the way we practice with guidelines. They're vital to us, but that doesn't mean that we accept them as holy writ. They have to be incorporated into our search for the truth of ourselves, which means the truth of the nature of all beings. So this isn't just a self-discovery thing. It's using self-discovery so you can, in that same move, discover everything. So we start off studying the self, but as Dogen puts it, you forget the self. The self drops away. And now, where do you find yourself? Right in the middle of the whole disaster. Everything going on. So fixed doctrines, religious institutions, we could call them skillful means for passing these basic truths along. And it's understandable that the Buddha, upon his enlightenment, wouldn't have viewed fixed doctrines very favorably. His practice was vital to its very core. And that's why it's like, well, everybody just has to do it. And that's the path that all Zen practitioners and teachers tread, is the need to just do it. Do the practice. It is a practice. It's not something that can be handed to you in books, although books can be helpful. And institutions, as I was saying, can be helpful. They provide resources. But the resources have to be made vital by each and every practitioner who affiliates with that institution. So it has to be a living interaction with all the energy that entails. And it's through those interactions, those flows of energy, that really the tradition carries forward. Whether it's large or small, really isn't so consequential. What is consequential is the energy that people are bringing to it and carrying it forward to others, sharing it. So, sort of Rohatsu as not some commemoration of something that happened 2,500 years ago, but Rohatsu as kind of a dedication, a rededication of practice, of practicing in the Buddha's footsteps, but making it our practice. So for me, that's always been the meaning of a Rohatsu. And I've gone to a lot of Rohatsu session, and that's the sense that I've always had of it, is this is to simply kind of inspire me to go back out there with my practice and to follow these doctrines in helpful ways, skillful ways, making use of institutions where that's appropriate and can be helpful. But recognizing that the real core source of all this is me and how I practice it, my actions, my speech, my effort, view, mindfulness, and so on. That's not something that's fixed or institutionalized. That's organic, right down and resides within each and every one of ourselves, which, when you come right down to it, that's true for Buddha. The Buddha that you're commemorating from 2,500 years ago, as the Zen adage has, kill that Buddha, because you need to focus on this one. That's the one that really matters. But it's easy to get caught up and to kind of institutionalize the Buddha. John and I were at a retreat a couple of months ago where the opening session was doing just that, because I was co-leading with another teacher, and that teacher introduced the expanded Heart Sutra, which includes Shakyamuni Buddha as one of, and the Buddha is approving of the teaching contained in the Heart Sutra. So the discussion started about the importance of that, how you could trust the Buddha, that he would, if he approves of it, then it's a good teaching. And they started going down that path of what the Buddha did. And I was planning to inject something, but finally the other teacher turned to me and said, "Do you have anything you'd like to add?" And it's like, "Oh yeah." It's like, I think you're going down the wrong path. The Buddha that you need to be worried about is you. So when you read the Heart Sutra, how do you approve of it? Do you think this is a good teaching? And why or why not? And how will you carry it out? I don't care about Shakyamuni Buddha so much, really. I mean, it's what do I make of it? The Buddha nature within me. So the Heart Sutra allows us those teachings. We can access that nature, this sense of seeking the truth of ourselves. Obviously, a core part of that truth is our emptiness. No eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, mind. Okay. So now I could say, yeah, I've sat with this, I've practiced with this, and I have found this to be really impactful for my life, this teaching. So this Buddha gives his stamp of approval. That's the importance. We have to make it our teaching, not some external doctrine. And as opposed to some of the connotations carried by a term like doctrine, making it a living description of reality that we can incorporate in ways that align with the nature of reality. So I can interact with things in ways that are likely to be impactful because I understand the nature of what I'm working with. Things like impermanence, interdependence, suffering and its causes. So I think we reached a point where maybe I could bow out here and open this up to any thoughts or questions you might have. Joe?
Dean, were you saying that the Heart Sutra precedes Shakyamuni Buddha?
No,
Oh.
no,
Okay.
no. Yeah,
Do you know about when the Heart Sutra came about?
yeah, it's like the early centuries of the Common Era. It's lumped in there with the Diamond Sutra and a whole slew of different Prajnaparamita sutras of varying lengths. A couple of which are available in English translation. But it falls in terms of, from a scholarly perspective, it falls under the heading of the Madhyamaka teachings, which are the teachings on emptiness. So a very important figure that we have occasion to refer to from time to time, who's within that part of Buddhist history, is Nagarjuna, because he was like the great Buddhist philosopher of emptiness. So it's not easy material to work through, but then on the other hand, Thich Nhat Hanh has a book that I would consider maybe his best book, and it's about Nagarjuna. Cracking the Walnut, I think, is is called. Because it is kind of like cracking a walnut because it has such a tough, tough shell to it. It's tough to get inside, but once you do, yum, yum. I mean, it's good stuff. And Thich Nhat Hanh, of course, is great at doing just that. But that might be within the scope of Buddhist teachings. That's the real walnut there, the teachings on emptiness. So, anything else? John?
Periodically, I think about how I got here. And one of the things that came to mind from your talk was something my father used to say, not real often, but often enough I remembered it. And that was all things in moderation. And then he would pause a second and say, including moderation. Which strikes me, that's what we're talking about with doctrine.
Yeah.
Doctrine's important, but
Yeah.
it needs to be tempered by wisdom.
Yeah.
And there's times not to be moderate.
Yeah. So true. I mean, wisdom is about how do you use the doctrine. Otherwise, I mean, we don't need a thinking mind. You just follow the doctrine and okay, that's it. But things don't work that way. Unless it's a mechanical device or something. But really living, breathing stuff doesn't operate that way. Yeah. Jan?
Well, I was wondering about the role of the teacher then in reducing liveliness. I can't remember the words, but because you can work on your own understanding, on your, from your own life,
Right.
and you can meet with a teacher, and sometimes that sort of squashes everything, and it becomes very confusing.
Yeah.
And it feels like doctrine sort of takes over on one's experience.
Absolutely.
And what do you do with that?
Well, if I'm understanding what you're saying, it's kind of like this is the teacher's approach about bringing out. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it might be time to, because if that's there's a role for doctrine, certainly, but it has to be connected to the world we live in. And it has to be made very clear what those connections are. So you're not just learning emptiness for the sake of emptiness, but you're understanding now emptiness and interdependence. So now you can look at that and with our modern minds, maybe the greatest example of that's ecology as an entire science that we now understand that the things we do have impact across a broad swath of this world. That's emptiness. Now that doctrine starts to mean something because it relates to our experience in our life. It has to. It has to. Otherwise, it's empty in the other sense of the term. It's of not any value. We can't really work with it. We can't practice it because we don't know how. It's just some abstract concept. And we know what Buddhism has to say about abstract concepts. They're just fabrications. They're not real. They might have a relationship to reality, but if you want reality, that's where we have to really become intimate with our life, with everything we encounter. It's predicated our practice on that sense of intimacy, not abstraction. Abstraction can help, provide a broader picture, but that's not. We get into trouble when we think the abstraction is the reality. It's not. Can't be. It's impossible. They're different things. Susan.
Yeah, I think this question has come up a bunch of times about the role of a teacher
Yeah.
in our group, and I have had the opportunity to interact with a number of teachers, and on the one hand, I have great respect for them and their teaching, and at the same time, it was clear that they were not my teacher.
Right.
That there is a sense that they have to get whatever this person is, and the karmic circumstances that gave rise to this personality and these experiences.
Yeah.
And when that connection isn't there,
Mhm.
It was impossible for me to have faith in this relationship. And there is a place, when you talked about what is a religion.
Yeah.
There's a book by Paul Tillich on faith.
Wow.
And he says that what distinguishes religion from philosophy is faith. So in our tradition, we don't take much for granted, but we do have faith that the Buddha's awakening was real and it's possible for all of us. And also we have faith in our teachers' ability to guide us even when it's painful.
Yeah. Even
when they tell us we're on the wrong track. Nope, you're holding on to something essentially you're going down the wrong, you're banging your head against the wall, and you need to back up and start over. And find a way through. And sometimes that's painful. And so the faith in the teacher and the wisdom of that teacher and the awakening of that teacher becomes really important. And if the feeling is that they're only just repeating something, and I did have an interaction with a teacher where I felt that. It was clear that person was not my teacher. I think they were just repeating what other people said, and that didn't work for me. So I think this can be a long search to find the right person, and just accepting who happens to be in a particular institution at a particular moment. Reverend Ogui, did you meet him?
Yes.
He was at Cleveland Buddhist Temple.
Right.
What a wonderful man. Not my teacher.
Yeah.
So
Right.
it didn't happen for me.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah. No, I mean, these kinds of teachings that are just by rote being conveyed and received are what in Zen circles would be called the dregs. That's just they're not the real teachings, because the real teachings, the real transmission is something very alive. That's why it doesn't fall under doctrine. It can also reference doctrine, but it has to be made something vibrant and alive that really changes a person, their way of seeing the world. And if that happens, then the way you interact with the world is going to follow. That's going to change too. Has to. Because you're seeing everything differently. Well, anything else? If not, this is uncanny. My clock's showing 10:50, so right. Nailed it.
It must be Susan's.
Yeah. She set the tone right out of the gate. We've been following. Well, let's chant out there. May our intention equally penetrate every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. Beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to become it.